So the other day I was rewatching the Battle of Geonosis at the end of Attack of the Clones, and I noticed the large artillery vehicles the Republic deployed during that battle, and it brought up a question. Where did they go? We really don't see them anywhere else throughout the entirety of the Clone Wars, and while there is technically one later date we see them, they're pretty absent. So I figured today we could talk about the self-propelled heavy artillery, or also known as the SPHA-T, and we'll talk about how it worked, and a little bit about how it was deployed, and maybe speculate on why we see less of it during the course of the Clone Wars. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So, these vehicles played a massive role during the Battle of Geonosis. They were deployed as heavy artillery elements to engage the evacuating Separatist core ships that were one of the key objectives of Republic forces during the battle, and once again, they were really the only weapon system that was effective against those core ships. So, where exactly did they go? Because we don't see them anywhere else during the war. Like I said, there's one exception, and we'll talk about that in a sec, but they're completely absent. So, what exactly happened to these tanks? Why don't we see them very much anymore? But before we jump into that, let's talk about the numbers and the basics. Like most vehicles deployed by the Grand Army of the Republic in the opening phases of the Clone Wars, these were designed by Rathana Heavy Engineering on Rathana. Devised as a heavy artillery piece and at 140 meters long, they were actually one of the largest weapon systems deployed by Republic ground forces during the course of the war, more capable than any other artillery unit deployed by the Republic, and one of the most viable weapons for engaging things like capital ships. Its primary weapon was a single heavy turbolaser, which maintained a sustained beam on a target, which did continual damage, as we see during the Battle of Geonosis, and this massive weapon system required a crew of 30 to both move the walker and then operate the weapon. So this weapon brings a lot of things to the table, a very powerful sustained turbolaser that once again can bust through heavy armor and shields on something like a capital ship and bring down something like a Lucrehulk class core ship. So where exactly did these go? Well, the answer is they didn't technically disappear, and we actually see one right at the end of the war. It's just not entirely on screen. During the Battle of Coruscant, we see a very brief shot of a blue beam firing from the ventral hangar on a Venator and absolutely decimating a Munificent class frigate. That beam is the beam from one of these heavy artillery pieces being fired from a hangar bay. Other than that, we really only see them in canon at the Battle of Geonosis. Now, they appear in a lot more places in Legends, but focusing on canon today. Now, at 140 meters, these are really massive vehicles and required a pretty substantial effort to move them from an Acclamator-class assault ship to the surface of a planet if the Acclamator wasn't landed. As a result, they ended up taking resources away from other vehicles that could be deployed to the battlefield, things like the more versatile ATTE. On top of that, 30 is a really large crew size for any field vehicle deployed by the Republic, and that meant it took more resources to maintain this vehicle just from a crew standpoint, let alone the energy needed to maintain that massive turbolaser. As a result, the Republic ended up opting to deploy other vehicles as opposed to this. So while these did likely remain in Republic military service stationed on most ships, they probably didn't see much combat, especially as newer alternatives came into service as the war dragged on. The most notable replacement for this vehicle was the RX-200 Falchion-class assault tank, which we see deployed against the Zillo Beast and deployed on Coruscant, once again, also against the Zillo Beast. These vehicles have a very similar weapon system, albeit scaled down, and a much smaller crew requirement. And because the vehicle is smaller and the crew is smaller, the resources required to maintain and operate these vehicles are less intensive, making these a more viable option to deploy in combat as opposed to the larger SPHA-Ts. That being said, as I mentioned, they did remain in service through to the end of the Clone Wars, as we do see one during the Battle of Coruscant, and it is mentioned a few places that these remained in service with the Empire into the reign of the Empire, albeit likely not for long. Another reason why this vehicle likely didn't see very much combat during the war was because of the practical applications of such a vehicle. Its heavy weapon, which is really its only armament, was really only designed to take out heavily armored targets that were protected by heavy shields, things like capital ships, and it really couldn't fire at any angle other than upwards. While it could fire at a variety of different upwards angles, it couldn't be used against ground targets, and it couldn't arc fire, so it wasn't capable of indirect fire like other artillery pieces the Republic deployed. As such, it was really only useful against capital ships hovering over battlefields, and while the Republic did that quite a bit during the war, we don't see that quite as often from the Separatists. And maybe it was because of this vehicle that the Separatists opted to keep their capital ships often in orbit, as opposed to bringing them down directly over battlefields. This meant that this really resource-intensive vehicle was useless in most combat situations, and so it makes sense that we really just don't see that many of them. And it makes sense that the Republic built a smaller, more useful, more versatile version of it for deployment pretty quickly in the war, early on in the conflict. All that being said, it did still play a crucial role in the Battle of Geonosis, with the Republic objectives of preventing Separatist leadership from escaping that engagement. If you'd like to learn more about the Battle of Geonosis and how that battle played out, and the role that these vehicles played in that battle, I'll leave a link up here to a video I have on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think it makes sense for the Republic to even build this vehicle. It clearly didn't see much success on the battlefield other than the battlefields on Geonosis, so do you think this was a good investment, or do you think they should have invested in other heavy weapon systems that might have been a little bit more versatile? And if you have anything else that you see me cover in Star Wars or anywhere else in science fiction, you can let me know down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.